Welcome to Media-eval, a medieval pop culture podcast, where we talk about how medieval and medieval-inspired movies, TV, and books depict the medieval world. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? In which they tell us about how modern people see the medieval past. I'm Sarah Ifft, a medieval historian, and today I'm joined by Rachel Aanstad to talk about Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So, Rachel, welcome.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Very happy that you're joining. And why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and about why you wanted to talk about this particular movie?
I have an MFA in scenic design, and it's called scenography, and it's a combination of costume, lighting, and set design for theater.
Okay.
And this, was part of the culmination of really a lifelong interest in all of those areas. Before that, I was an architect. I worked on a lot of historic structures. And before that, I used to teach a lot of kind of goddessy, mythology, lore kinds of classes, and I would do freelance articles and stuff. This was way before the internet. So, I would go to a bookstore and I would say, Goddess 101, and people would show up because there were like 2 books available and, nothing else. And it was fun. It was a really fun way to earn a living while I was raising my kids back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
So I have a lifelong interest in Snow White as kind of an archetype. And I saw the movie when I was very young, I'm sure. And the thing that struck me about it as a kid was that she had dark hair and pale skin. And I am ridiculously pale. Like I will glow under moonlight. And back in the day, before my hair turned this appealing shade of gray, my hair was very dark. And so Snow White was the first kind of feminine archetype that I felt like represented me. That, that she wasn't blonde. That was the main thing. She wasn't blonde, And at the time, like in the early 60s, there was an incredible bias for being blonde, to the point that like you just kind of almost assumed that if you weren't blonde, and obviously this relates to everybody who isn't white either a lot of the time, that if you weren't blonde, that you were never going to meet your handsome prince. It was never going to happen because you were the one that were discarded.
Right.
You were the ugly stepsister or whatever. So I really loved Snow White. And then, as I got older and got kind of into the goddessy stuff, we'll get into this a little bit more later, but all of the symbolism, the apple and the black, white, and red and all that stuff just really captivated me. And I love the story. And as someone who's kind of got mixed feelings about Disney at this point in my life, Snow White gets a special pass for me.
We all have those nostalgia passes, right?
I think so. I mean, it's problematic, and we'll get into that too, but it's beautiful. It is just a gorgeous piece of art, and I'm so impressed with the artists who made this incredible film.
Yeah, the animation is stunning, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more of your perspective on it, since it's not one of the ones of Disney that I'm most connected with. The brunette thing was definitely nice. I'm a brunette as well, but I feel like even when I was pretty young, I remember kind of thinking, because I'm young enough that by the time I was watching Disney, there were at least things like Aladdin and The Little Mermaid.
Yes.
And I remember even as a kid finding Snow White a little disappointing as a heroine in terms of her level of activeness. So it is a stunning movie in terms of the animation, but I definitely, on this watch too, didn't quite find myself connecting with Snow White and what she does and what she's looking for.
Well, I think, to be honest, I connected with the Queen. I mean,
right. I liked her more too.
But it was, I liked that both of the characters that were supposed to be attractive were not blonde. And you're right, like they're really wasn't anything else. I mean, later, there was Aladdin and Pocahontas and so many other options that people just with dark hair, could choose to get excited about. And I can, she's definitely an old-fashioned heroine for sure.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was released in 1937 and stars Adriana Caselotti as Snow White, Lucille Laverne as the evil queen, Harry Stockwell as the prince, and then let's see, you've got assorted people as dwarves. I'll be honest, I do not know any of these actors because I do not know anything about people who did voice work in the 1930s.
Gosh, I can't imagine why.
It's unfortunately just not one of my areas of expertise.
I'll give you a pass for that.
But I'll still recognize them and give their names in respect for the work that they did. Roy Atwell as Doc, Pinto Colvig as both grumpy and sleepy, Otis Harlan as happy, Scotty Matra as bashful, Billy Gilbert as sneezy, and for Dopey, we have Eddie Collins and Jimmy McDonald both provided some of the vocalization for Dopey. I'll acknowledge all of them, despite the fact that I cannot really say anything about them.
That's all right.
So the first proper segment, the enumeratio or recap, is where we just spend a little time talking through what happens in this movie. We begin with our visual representation of a storybook. It has some very nice gilding. It has some lovely illuminations. And it tells us that once upon a time, there was a princess named Snow White, whose stepmother forced her to work as a scullery maid. We kind of learned that she is, in this position, but we actually really see the queen before we see Snow White.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, I'm sure I haven't watched it in at least 20 years. And I'd remembered little snippets of it, but didn't remember kind of what order they were in. And I was like, wow, she is really the star of the show. And no wonder that I was so impressed by her. Because she is gorgeous.
Yeah.
And she's clearly a person of power. And you kind of question, like when I saw Snow White, I remember thinking, well, she's pretty, but she's not prettier than the queen.
Yeah.
The
I actually think the queen is more interesting looking, certainly.
Gorgeous. She's really gorgeous. So, and with those cheekbones and everything, very glamorous. But one thing that I do want to say about like that first opening with the books and the illuminations is like those colors are spot on.
Yeah.
Like they did not pick some kind of bright pinks and greens or something. And you get the feeling right away that this is not a movie specifically targeted towards children. It was inclusive of them for sure, but they were really trying to bring adults in. And I think part of that was the use of these really historically accurate colors, this palette, that I think kind of added a more serious touch to it.
Yeah, and that I do think also that it's also actually an accurate palette. That red and blue and gold would have been the colors that you would have most often seen in medieval illuminated manuscripts. Yeah, and again, we have already mentioned the animation, but it really is, I think, a movie that you can watch essentially for the aesthetics. There are parts of the plot that are in some ways sort of light, but that I think just the visuals alone are something that you can really kind of see and enjoy as art, regardless of other aspects of the film.
Yeah, I think honestly that it's the kind of movie that you could watch without even listening to it or paying attention to the story. But then you would miss the wonderful sound design that they did, which is phenomenal. So let's give them a little credit too.
Yes, definitely. So the queen has her magic mirror, and she has the slave in the magic mirror. Some interesting pieces of, magical slavery happening here. She tells her, the mirror man, to come from the furthest space through wind and darkness and tell her who is the fairest of them all. And is told that despite her rags, Snow White is nevertheless fairer than she.
Yeah, what do you think about those rags? I guess we'll get to that in a minute, huh?
I mean, there certainly are rags.
Part of this scene, it's a very lonely castle.
Yes.
She apparently only has the mirror to talk to. So, you're kind of glad that she has the mirror for companionship. Do we want to talk about now, like about her costume, or do we want to wait and finish going through the kind of summary of the movie?
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and talk about the costume stuff? I know you did some research on that. Yeah.
Oh, I did. Okay, so initially, her design was to be kind of a frumpy middle-aged lady. And I assure you, listeners, I am myself a frumpy middle-aged lady. And so I say that with much affection. But that was the original design. And then after a movie called She, which was released in 1935, came out. And it's this sort of weird fantasy drama with a kind of femme fatale trope. But the main character, She, is dressed almost identically. In fact, it's really clear that they just ripped the whole design right off of this character. And the woman who played She is Helen Gahagan Douglas. I'll spell that middle name, her maiden name, Gahagan Douglas. I went down a whole rabbit hole checking out this woman. She's amazing. She ran against Nixon for Senator of California.
Really?
Yes.
Good for
and
her.
If any of you have heard the phrase tricky dick, she came up with that.
Wow.
She is an incredible person. She did all this amazing work against fascism. She was a very happily married woman. For some reason, had an affair with LBJ, but I'm not going to judge. I've done some stupid shit myself when picking out men. So I'm going to give her a pass there. But anyway, I really recommend looking her up. But what's interesting about this is that in the plot of the movie She, part of what happens is that there's, kind of a blustery dad and a handsome young hero and, a fragile but plucky ingenue. And part of the story is that She decides that she is going to keep the hero for herself and sacrifice the plucky young ingenue. And there's this whole thing that goes on that Disney was going to lift that whole plot and insert it into Snow White. And there were whole things drawn and animated of the prince being stuck in the dungeon and turning down the queen's marriage proposal. And the animals were going to rescue him from the dungeon and all this stuff. And then he was going to go and find Snow White. And they cut it all. I think that was wise. I don't think any of that needed to be in there. But part of what Disney was dealing with at the time was that this was being phrased as Disney's folly. Because nobody had ever done a full feature-length animated movie before, ever. The perceived wisdom was that it's just going to fail, it's going to be terrible. That didn't happen. But I think a lot of this kind of appropriating that design had to do with him trying to make it be relevant in the 1930s. Right. He was kind of lifting from that. And we'll see that in some of the other issues. Now, something else that I want to talk about with this dress, because it's glorious with the snood and the lines and everything, very medieval.
Yes.
And, we'll see later that Snow White is not dressed in that same medieval style. This is kind of part of an old trope going back to Shakespeare and before, where people in those kind of Gothic medieval styles are considered not just old-fashioned, but actually evil because of Henry VIII and what happened with Catholicism and Protestantism and everything else. That whole Gothic style and medieval style was associated with the Catholic Church.
Right.
And I want to be clear, people, I don't think Disney or any of his animators were sitting there thinking, oh, we're slamming on Catholics now. I don't think that's how it works. I think that there's cultural influences that we pick up without realizing it. And so part of that is old, bad, new, good. And to a lot of people who saw the movie, they would have understood right away that queen was evil because she had on that kind of gothic-y kind of a gown.
And it, of course, also very much maps on to standard tropes, which are very much current tropes in the 1930s. They are, I would say, at least in some circles, people no longer accept these as valid now. But, of course, tropes about the Middle Ages having been the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages as this period that was full of essentially intolerance and violence, and then the Renaissance as being this moment of light and cultural efflorescence, and all of a sudden everything was fine and everyone was very happy. And as I've talked about many times on this podcast, that is not a great representation of the Renaissance or the Middle Ages, and also ignores a lot of continuities between these periods. But those very much also would have been things that would have been in the back of people's minds, as well as these kind of conventions, that had been longer standing, Snow White is scrubbing the outdoor stairs, which I love as the task that is assigned to her, because it seems sort of fruitless.
Well, she's the only other person in the castle, so what?
Right. I mean, the practicalities, I will say, of the entire way this society is structured don't make a great deal of sense. There are no subjects in this kingdom. There are no servants in this castle. There's this prince. Where does he come from? What does he belong to? What does he rule? There is no explanation of any of these structures whatsoever. And as I said, the desertedness of the castle is very odd. A castle like this would require dozens of, perhaps even, hundreds of servants, not to mention, a court, that there would be other members of the nobility that would be there. The kind of desertion of this castle is sort of bizarre, but I guess was not the focus of the film.
Well, I can explain. Human beings are really difficult to animate. And they had a really difficult time animating all of the human characters, particularly the prince, which is why you only see him twice.
Huh. Interesting.
Because, and, as I was talking about earlier, that whole plot in the dungeon, the reason they decided not to do it is because they could not figure out a way to make this sort of look like a tense, dramatic scene with the limits of what they understood about animation at the time. And, animation was really in its beginning stages. One part of this whole project, one of the artists started a life drawing group in his home. And life drawing, for those of you who aren't artists, means that you go to a room and you draw someone from life. And sometimes that person is clothed, sometimes they're not. It's incredibly valuable as an artist to just be able to sit and stare and draw at somebody. And Walt found out about this and then started hosting these life drawing sessions at the studio, and then added a whole bunch of other art classes.
Oh, wow.
And so then one of the things that they finally figured out was that for the human beings that they needed to rotoscope. And what rotoscope means is that they filmed human beings doing human being stuff, and then the animators drew directly over those frames rather than just trying to animate from scratch. That's the logical reason why it's so deserted.
Okay. Because, it's not worth doing a bunch of background people, right? Which, totally makes sense. But just watching it is sort of bizarre to see this deserted castle. The prince appears. He climbs over a wall and just kind of watches her slightly creepily for a while. He is supposed to be charming. He starts singing to her. He says, I only have but one song, so also not the most creative gentleman. I personally do not find the prince especially compelling as a romantic hero. I find him rather dull, but I also, to be honest, find Snow White rather dull. So I guess they deserve each other, I suppose.
It seems like they're happy together.
Yeah. So the queen, now that she knows that Snow White is fairer than she, is now set on having her killed. The obvious, of course, commentary to be made here is about the fact that there is, of course, some really interesting gender dynamics in the fact that her sole motivation, it's not power, it's not money, it's vanity. That the only reason she wants to kill Snow White is because Snow White is apparently prettier than she is, according to a magic mirror.
Yeah, and you kind of have to wonder, who is she trying to be pretty for?
Since there's no one there.
Since there's no one there. It's like the magic mirror is like, are they like, nagging her? Are they just like, are they like tired of dealing with this lady and just are like, you're not the fairest anymore. It is a strange dynamic, but one that I, as a little girl in the 60s, just accepted.
Right.
That the need to be beautiful was paramount in in any female type person. And of course, this was perfectly logical that they would want to do this.
And of course, also the idea that beauty is something objective, right? That the magic mirror is presented as just having this essentially objective knowledge about who is the most beautiful person, and that there is an objective answer to that question. That it's not something that depends on your personal preferences and taste in terms of what you find beautiful.
Yeah, it's definitely a two-dimensional idea of beauty.
Yeah.
There. And, you can kind of say, well, the movie is sort of a warning against that particular style of vanity. It's hard to see that as a positive thing.
Right.
That, you're obsessed with your own image in a mirror. And again, a common trope that, women are obsessed with vanity and that this is their downfall and everything else, when, we know that women are put in a position where if they don't make themselves as attractive as possible, that then they're just flat out ignored. So you can't win. You can't win that one.
Right. I mean, and even, treated differently at your job if you're perceived as not putting sufficient effort into your appearance as a woman. And of course, the film very much kind of trucks in that, right? In that it is this very obvious double standard, in that it's, so on the one hand, vanity is bad, but on the other hand, beauty is valued above all else. And this character also, her goodness and her beauty are linked kind of thematically in certain ways. So it is very much kind of trying to have things both ways. The queen now tries to have her killed. She tells the huntsman to take Snow White into the forest and kill her and bring back her heart in a box. The box has a nice picture of a heart on it. I'll talk more about the box later. And Snow White is sent off into the forest to pick wildflowers. And she has a new dress now.
Yeah.
I don't know why she has a new dress, practically speaking. In terms of the film, it's because they wanted to put her in something pretty and not in her literal rags the entire time, I suppose.
I guess. I think it was supposed to show maybe that she's not working, so she doesn't have her rags on, but why she's traipsing through the woods in her best dress, we're not really clear on.
Right. Yeah. So she has her fancy dress and is wandering around the woods. She's picking flowers. She's having a full-on conversation with a bird, and the huntsman goes to kill her. She does not defend herself, but she does express shock, and this is sufficient to make him feel guilty, and so he doesn't kill her and tells her, the queen is jealous of you. She wants you dead, so run away, don't come back. She flees, and this is a really, I think, visually interesting scene that she kind of falls into a swamp. There are these creepy trees, there are some crocodiles, but in the light of day, these kind of horror eyes, which seem very sinister, reveal themselves as instead being a panoply of cute woodland creatures.
That's a cute scene.
Yeah.
I remember being scared for her and then feeling this real sense of relief.
Yeah.
When all the little animals came out like that really packs a wallop.
Yeah.
I think emotionally, I think they do a real good job of building tension there for sure.
Yeah. And this is also, I think, the earliest example of what will become a very obvious Disney trope of the kind of animal sidekicks / accompaniments and the particular kind of connection with animals that the kind of Disney princess tends to have.
Well, I think it's certainly the first time in a full-length feature like this.
Right.
But it was a fairly common trope, actually, in Disney short form before that. There's one called The Goddess of Spring. There's a few other cartoons that are horrifically racist and sexist. But, even when you look at Mickey Mouse, it all kind of stems from that.
Yeah.
And it's because animals were easier to animate. You don't run into that uncanny valley territory with the animals. So, but it certainly did it in such a way that almost every other female archetype heroine after that, is supposed to be able to get along with small woodland creatures.
Right.
And then that goes back to, mythology, Persephone and everything else.
Yeah. She has all of these animals who lead her to a cottage in the woods, which she describes as being adorable and just like a doll's house. She fixes her hair before she knocks at the door.
Phew.
God forbid anybody see her without her hair having been fixed. Then, since nobody is home, she just goes ahead and goes inside. And based on the size of the chairs, she assumes that children live there, since she does not seem to have a concept of there being any other option. She comments on the the messiness, as well as the fact that the cobweb-encrusted broom means that there probably is not a lot of sweeping going on in this household, and guesses that there might be orphans. And she then cleans the house, because that's what women do.
No comment.
Right. I do like that she delegates some of the labor to the miscellaneous animals.
Same.
And I love the effectiveness of squirrel tails as brooms, apparently.
Right.
And this is the whistle while you work song, but it is very much like, oh, okay, so she does all the cleaning. She gets some people to help with the cleaning, but she has to direct them. There's even a moment where I think these squirrels are trying to sweep dust under the rug, and she has to correct them. And so, there is this delegation, but it's also very much that she still has to do the emotional labor of instructing people on the right way to clean, even if she's not literally doing it all herself.
Not only that, but then they sweep it into the mouse's hole, and then the mouse has to come out and yell at them.
Right. The poor mouse.
The poor mouse.
There's also a spider, which is great that they're trying to clean up this cobweb, and the spider's like, excuse me?
Yeah. I was here first.
Right. This is just as much my house as theirs, thank you. We meet the dwarves, who are mining for miscellaneous gems and singing a little kind of bit about digging and about diamonds. But then precisely as the clock strikes 5, they are very, very orderly. They sing the hi-ho, it's home from work we go song. I find the dwarves also sort of logistically bizarre in that it is very unclear what they are doing with these diamonds. They just are kind of locking them up. And I will, of course, note this is one of my kind of usual things that I tend to notice as somebody who is both Jewish and who studies anti-Judaism, that the fact that you have this group of people who are fairly large-nosed compared to other characters in the film, who seem to be mostly portrayed as collecting and hoarding wealth, is questionable.
I hear you. And I got a lot of Jewish blood in me, so I feel you. There are so many things wrong.
Right.
With the dwarves.
Oh,
so
yes.
We'll get into that, but pretty much every horrible racial trope that you can assign to somebody, an ableist trope, we'll get into dopey and everything else, but I agree. I feel like, in terms of the practicality of mining and hoarding gems, I do kind of wonder why there aren't any in the house, but...
And they're so isolated. It's not like you see them going and trading or anything even. It's very odd. I don't know. My only guess is that they're mining them for a dragon so the dragon doesn't eat them or something. Right. That's all I can come up with. I don't know. But I agree with you about the anti-Semitic overtones there. I think that, there's so much in the ether. Yeah. And it's not like Disney doesn't have a long and questionable history of assorted, problematic racial tropes.
So bad.
Yes.
So bad.
Snow White, meanwhile, goes to explore upstairs. She's followed by the animals. I do love the turtle, that we have this little kind of theme that the turtle is obviously slower than all of the other animals, and the turtle will, climb up. But of course, just as the turtle makes it wherever it's making it, everybody else is turning back, and it gets, knocked around and kind of retreats into its shell. I feel very bad for the turtle.
Yeah.
She finds the beds, which have the names carved on them. Upon seeing Sleepy, it's like, oh, am kind of sleepy, and goes and takes a nap stretched along 3 entire beds. I do appreciate the representation of like afternoon naps as the way to go, since as we know from the dwarves' clock, it is precisely 5 p.m.
Well, she just cleaned the whole freaking house.
Oh, yeah. You can't blame her for being tired.
But you do have to wonder a little about her sense of self-preservation. That I guess she thought they were all children, and so was not worried about what would happen when they found her sleeping. I don't think I could sleep in that kind of situation.
I don't think I could either, but her sense of self-preservation is in general, I think, not fantastic.
Good point. Good point.
So this definitely seemed odd, but I feel like just paled for me in comparison to the even more obvious example of a kind of failure of an instinct of self-preservation later.
Excellent point.
The dwarfs get back home and see that there are lights on in the house. They kind of sneak on in and are, very concerned about the fact that also it's clean. There's dirty work afoot because the house has been cleaned. And there's a lot of like, my cup, the sugar that's been like encrusted in it is gone because somebody washed it.
Well, to be fair, if I came in my house and somebody had cleaned it all, I would freak out too.
I also would freak out. On the other hand, I feel like my house is not quite so filthy that it would be immediately apparent that somebody had cleaned it. But, I remember like when I was a kid being like irritated because the cleaning lady would move things around and all of that.
Definitely.
So especially, since it means somebody's been in their house, you can't totally blame them.
And listeners, I can see Sarah's room and I can vouch that there are no spooky cobwebs hanging in the corners. There isn't big piles of dust all over everything. It looks very nice.
Oh, well, thank you. And yeah, so, you can't see the floor where because I have a very furry dog and I have hardwood floors, there are often these kind of just like tumbleweeds of dog fur that reappear moments after I've swept. So there's really no fully getting rid of them, especially in the summer where she sheds extra.
Well, I feel you there. I got 3 dogs.
Yeah.
But, okay. The dwarves did not have that excuse, though. They did not have a bunch of dogs shedding all over their floor.
No, they did not. They start to search the house. They do not notice the animals at first, although the animals, especially like the birds, are just like fucking with them, essentially.
Yes.
Which I kind of enjoy. They realize that the intruder is in the bedroom. They kind of bully Dopey into being the one who goes upstairs.
I have so many feelings about this.
Yeah.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah. We see Snow White is kind of yawning and stretching under a blanket, which, freaks them out. They kind of all flee out of the house. Dopey actually gets stuck inside, and then he runs out, but he's, like, covered in pots and pans because of his, like, failure to try and escape, and then they start hitting him, which is awful. And, there's a lot of ableist tropes with the dwarves in general, but Dopey in particular, I think, is being portrayed as in some way neurodiverse and in a way that is very much infantilizing and mocking of him, and it's not great.
I agree with you. As an autistic person, mutism and autism, it's such a complicated subject that we're not going to be able to get into fully here. But I will say that I feel like Dopey is redeemed. Mm-hmm. I don't like the way he's treated. I don't like him being bullied. But I think he's actually the smartest dwarf in the house, really, when it comes right down to it. And we'll talk about him more later.
Yeah. So we will continue the conversation. And he is able to, communicate with them, essentially, even though he does not speak. And he tells them, essentially, that the monster is currently asleep in their beds. They venture back inside, planning to kill this monstrous intruder. To be fair, the way we have the animation is done, at least the way that Snow White is stretches, you can't totally blame them for thinking that she is something kind of monstrous. But Doc then does pull back the sheet to reveal Snow White, and at that point they're like, oh, it's a girl. She's pretty. It's like an angel. We shouldn't murder her.
Hi.
Although we do have the one dissonant voice from Grumpy, who says that she's a female. Some things never change. All females is poison and full of wicked wiles.
it's so bad. It's so bad. Yeah. And again, this, to bring up that movie She again, this was based on a book where the phrase, she who must be obeyed, comes from. And so, this whole misogynistic trope, it just goes right through. And it's too bad that Grumpy had to get all misogynist, because if he hadn't, he would be my favorite dwarf for sure. I understand how he feels. I don't want strangers in my house. Yeah. Who the heck is this? They touched all my stuff. Get him out of here. Yeah. Yeah.
Why should we risk our lives for this person that we don't know? So, yeah, you can't blame him for a lot. And the one thing I will say in favor of the film is that his very overt misogyny is something that he has a kind of arc of getting over to some extent. But, the film is this kind of dynamic that you often see in films where there are a number of misogynist tropes that are just quietly accepted, but that certain kinds of overt vocalized misogyny are considered to be, not okay and a sign of a person who has to either is a villain or who has to be kind of fixed in some way.
Yeah, that's a good point. He doesn't get a lot of accolades for his crummy statements. Yeah.
Right, and everybody does. The other dwarves all do disagree with him. Mm-hmm. She wakes up, says oh, you're, quote, little men. She guesses their names and introduces herself. And really very much we also have the way that she talks to them is extremely patronizing, in particular with Grumpy, that she, he says something and she's like, you must be Grumpy. This is very much the beginning of a process where the way she talks... My cat just leapt onto my desk and walked over my entire computer, as she occasionally does.
It's a beautiful kitty. I don't blame her.
Yes, and she's 19, so she can do whatever she wants.
Do whatever she wants. That's right.
But yeah, so we have the beginning of this use of language and of behaviors on the part of Snow White related to the dwarves, which are extremely infantilizing in a way that is, of course, very ableist, right? This assumption that because these people are, have dwarfism and are the size that one might associate with children, that they are and should be treated as children. Yeah,
it's kind of painful. However, their house was a mess.
Yes.
I have walked into a house full of bachelors and had that same response.
Fair.
Not where I cleaned the whole house, but where I really thought of them as children. Because they clearly didn't understand, the basics of taking care of yourself. And so, I wonder how that scene would have played differently if she'd come in and everything was, clean.
Right.
If they had their shit together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she just intruded, then would she be like, oh, hi, sorry.
Right.
Instead of, I just cleaned up all your mess.
Right. But which, of course, she was not asked to do, and people obviously
she was not.
And not that I'm defending the level of cleanliness of that home, but...
Nobody asked her.
Nobody asked her. People have different preferences in terms of their cleanliness level.
Absolutely.
And she is, an intruder. She does at this point, she introduces herself, and they realize that, she is the princess. Grumpy thinks that they should send her away because, they're going to get killed, and I don't blame him for that.
Yeah.
But the others are more won over by her and are in particular tempted by her offer to keep house in exchange for being allowed to stay and for baking. The gooseberry pies really clinch it at the end.
Yeah, and, to be fair, if somebody came over and said, I'll bake you a pie every day, I wouldn't say no.
That might be one of the few things that might compel me to allow a roommate to stay. But on the other hand, I make a pretty good pie, so I'm not sure I would. I'm not sure it would be sufficient.
There you go. It wouldn't work so well for you. It might for me.
But but it is again, the obviously very gender dynamic of here's a woman, so she's going to clean.
It's painful. It's painful. I'm making light of it because it's so dang painful.
Oh, yeah.
And again, as somebody who grew up in the 60s and then the 70s, who didn't have a real fondness for cooking, to me, this was just another sign that I clearly was never going to find love in my life. Snow White holds up this really kind of impossible ideal.
Yeah.
As they all do. Like, first of all, how does a princess learn how to bake?
Right. I mean, I guess she's the only servant in this giant castle, so we can presume that she is actually making dinner for the queen every night.
Who taught her?
That's such a good question.
Yeah, who taught her? So,
because it's before the days of recipe blogs online.
Right. Clearly, it's just her feminine intuition that taught her how to bake gooseberry pies, apparently. So, okay, so she convinces them with the magic of pie.
Yes, and actually, I will just say one more thing about the cleaning dynamic, which is that it does also normalize the expectation that girls should be taught to clean and to cook, and boys shouldn't, because basically their mother will do that for them, and then eventually their wife will do that for them.
And why else would they consent to marry if it wasn't to get a live-in maid, right?
Right. So, definitely we're kind of normalizing that, yes. So she also has to teach them, or at least instruct them, to wash their hands. They do know how to, or well, Doc knows how, the kind of mechanics of how to go about washing one's hands, and instructs the rest.
But we're back to the infantile.
Yes.
Infantilizing. That word is hard. Infantilizing of the people who don't look just like her.
Yeah, the way she talks to them, she's very much talking to them like children. And as you were saying before, on the one hand, they clearly didn't wash their hands, and her expectation that they might not have is not entirely unreasonable based on the state of their house. But the way she speaks to them, I think, is very much, it is the way you speak to a child.
Do you think that this is all to show her as mother material? That she is that she's worthy of the prince because she can be a good mother?
I think in some ways, that it is very much like, this is what is the ideal woman, is she should be beautiful, and also she can cook, and also she can clean, and also she is good at childcare. So it is a very, very traditional representation of what a woman should be like.
And then, that who is her role model, right? The queen, who obviously is the opposite of that kind of maternal ideal.
Oh, yes.
So anyway, where did she learn it from? But okay.
Back at the castle, the queen asks the mirror who is the fairest of them all, and the mirror's a real narc here. The mirror's like, whoops, sorry. It's Snow White, she's still alive, she's still the fairest, and this is where she is, and you've got a pig's heart. I feel like the mirror did not need to be quite this forthcoming.
And I'm worried about the huntsman now.
Right. Right, and this is actually something that does get dealt with in some adaptations. The show Once Upon a Time, and I think it actually does come up that, like, the huntsman character is killed or cursed or something by the queen, which makes sense.
Yeah, at least in this movie, it appears that she's just so focused on Snow White that maybe she doesn't have a chance to hurt him. Yeah, he might get lucky in that she goes immediately after Snow White and has all of this prep for that. And so it's, when would she have time to kill him? So he might end up getting away after all. We'll hope for the best. She plans to disguise herself as an old woman, and she's got assorted beakers, etc. So I guess, this is the cooking that she's doing. So she certainly has these kind of, chemistry, skills. Yeah, exactly. That she can, cook up a potion, which she, mixes with thunder and is transformed into an older woman. And I don't understand why, if she can do all of this as a magic potion, why she can't transform herself to be just a tiny bit prettier than Snow White and solve the whole problem that way. Well, I don't think it lasts. True. I think that it's supposed to be a timed thing. There's so many questions about this until, you think about the tropes involved, of course. And again, getting back to that She movie, at the end of spoiler alert, if you're going to watch this movie, you might want to stop listening for the next 3 minutes or something. But at the end of the movie, she ages. Like she had this eternal life kind of thing. She was eternally young and beautiful. And then at the very end of the movie, she loses all that and ages right in front of the hero's eyes and dies. But, it does beg a few questions. One is that, yes, Snow White would have recognized the queen in her other form, but she's told to look out for a witch. And this woman does kind of check all those boxes of being a witch. So I, kind of wondering why she picked that form at all. But, when you look at it in kind of that maiden mother crone archetype, then it starts to make a lot more sense. So.
Right. But yeah, practically speaking, I feel like, dressing up as a, sort of normal looking young woman would have been a kind of better strategic move.
Or even a male peddler or something. Yeah, right. She's not very smart. Not a very smart woman.
Nobody is that bright, really, in this film.
No, in this movie, no. Except the birds. The birds are brilliant.
Yes, the birds really are, kind of bringing it in this film. And she plans also to make a poisoned apple, which is going to keep Snow White forever in the sleeping death. Back at the cottage, the dwarves and Snow White are playing music and having a grand time. Even Grumpy is sort of grudgingly participating. They ask her to tell them a love story, to which she tells them the story of it just basically boils down to this one time I kind of looked at this guy from a distance.
Hey, when I was that age, I might have had the same love story.
Right, yeah. And she sings the Someday My Prince Will Come song. That, eventually this will turn into more of an actual love story than it is at the moment. They've got another elaborate clock, which informs them that it is now past bedtime. They give Snow White all of the beds upstairs.
I know.
Which is very nice.
Pretty sweet.
It is. Yeah.
I guess they're preserving her maidenhood, right? It wouldn't be proper
for her to share the room, right?
For her to share the room with a bunch of adult males.
Right. But you do have to kind of feel bad for them as they kind of slot themselves into various, places throughout the house. One of them is using Dopey's butt as a pillow, which honestly is looks like the most comfortable choice.
It does. And, this is where you start to realize that Dopey is the smartest one. Because as they are all discussing about her using all the beds, he sneaks off and grabs the pillow first.
Yes.
He doesn't get to keep it because they're bullies.
Right.
But he does parse quickly that he should go get that pillow. And now, why she didn't just throw some pillows and blankets down, who knows? But
yeah, she really did not need all of the pillows and blankets. No, it's not the most
she's
thoughtful
just
move on her part.
Oh, thank you, and closes the door and goes to sleep.
Right. Thanks, bye.
Yeah.
She does, however, say her prayers that she blesses the dwarves and asks for her dreams to come true and for Grumpy to like her. And again, I think he would have liked her more if she'd sent down a few pillows. God helps those who help themselves, Snow White.
Yes, agreed.
Meanwhile, the queen is making her poisoned apple, and, it is very dramatically represented. It turns black, and there's a thing, and there's a skull that appears on it, and she has to magically turn it back to red so it'll, look something that a normal human might be willing to eat. And she actually has a bird as well. She has a raven who's kind of hanging out.
I love that raven so much.
I love the raven, but the raven is clearly not as bright as the other birds because the raven has watched this entire thing, but then immediately tries to eat the apple. And it's really? Haven't you been paying attention?
Well, yes and no. I mean, she holds it out to him and the raven shrinks back. So the raven looks interested, but
kind of realizes, at some point.
Clearly, that raven looked worried to me.
Yeah,
it looked very worried. It's it looked to me like it was going, "Oh, lady, you have gone round the bend."
Right.
Is what I got from that guy.
Yeah, and she does double check before leaving what the antidote might be to this poisoned apple, and confirms that it is love's first kiss. And says, thank goodness, don't have to worry about that. They'll just bury her alive immediately. And so, no cause for concern there. She takes off. I also like that on her way out, there is this skeleton that seems to have died reaching for a pitcher of water.
Oh, I know.
And she kind of cracks thirsty.
Just to show us that she, even though she looks like a sweet little granny, she's still the horrible person.
Oh, yes.
That we know her to be.
Oh, yes. And again, talking about these kind of ideas about beauty, that I think it is interesting that although this is obviously meant to be temporary, we do now have this setup created now that there is a match between your inner and outer state, right? That for the remainder of the film, we see that the one who is good is visually beautiful, and the one who is evil is visually not conventionally beautiful.
Yeah.
The next morning, as they leave for work, they all of the dwarves warn Snow White to be careful of strangers. If only she had listened. She kisses them on the head. Dopey, it's this kind of weird thing that he first of all kind of angles to be kissed on the lips and then also keeps like running back for additional kisses.
Again, the smartest dwarf in the house.
The smartest, yeah. And it is sort of sweet. And, he is like, yeah, but it is this kind of weird, like, if that were an adult man doing that under many other representations, it would be creepy.
Yeah. I'll tell you what I like about that, though, is she doesn't do it.
True. She has boundaries.
She has boundaries. She established the boundary. And it's not like he retaliates.
Oh, no. True.
He's like, yeah, kiss me on the forehead again. Yeah, kiss me on the forehead again. So, and Dopey is supposed to be young.
Right. True.
Dopey is supposed to be like a teenager.
Because he's the only one who does not have a beard, I believe.
That's right. He doesn't have a beard. He's supposed to be like a very young dwarf. Mythical dwarf physiology is not real clear.
Right.
But, we don't know how old Dopey really is. But, he kind of is meant to be like the childlike way that she relates to all of the dwarves, really. Yeah. So, yeah, I kind of liked that.
Even Grumpy does also, wish her well and gets a kiss on the head. And, it is nice that Grumpy is coming around. I appreciate that.
It is. But what I noticed is like they had to be careful and not make Grumpy suddenly into Happy.
Right.
Because that would have reduced all this, fun tension they had going on. So right after he gets kissed on the forehead, he trips, he falls, he bangs his head on the bridge, and then it gets soaking wet, and he has all these reasons to be grumpy again. And so then he stomps off.
Right. And he's also very grudging about the whole thing. He doesn't want to express his emotions.
No, but he did clean his head off before he went over there and took his hat off. So.
He did. The queen makes her way over. She's followed by vultures, which really, should be a giveaway of something.
Yeah, kind of a tip-off.
Right. Snow is making a pie. She, I guess, is making each of them individual pies because she puts Grumpy's name on this one.
Yeah. She's an overachiever.
Yes. Really trying to, kind of, I don't know, maybe she's worried that it's only on a trial basis they've allowed her to stay, and she's really got to sell it. The health department would probably not be thrilled at the level of animal involvement in food preparation, but they're very cute.
Probably not, but, well, that's a whole other issue.
Right. The queen arrives. In addition to being a stranger and a woman who looks like a stereotypical witch, she is also the most creepy and sinister and unconvincing person, villain that I have ever seen. Unconvincing in the sense of convincing the person that, she's not in fact a villain. She keeps, kind of chuckling in this very sinister way. She's like, oh, the men prefer apple pies, try an apple. The woodland creatures, they get it. They attack her. She doesn't take the cue that if all of the animals hate you, there's something wrong with you. And she shoos them out, and, when the queen is like, oh, my heart, she's like, oh, yes, of course, come inside. And the animals then at this point, realizing that she has no instinct for self-preservation, go and rush off to fetch the dwarves to save her. The queen also tells Snow that it's a magic wishing apple that will make all of her dreams come true. And it's just so weird because she's clearly a little bit repelled and turned off by this person who is creepy. But she also completely believes that everything she's saying is true.
Yeah, the witch rolled high on her charisma score. I don't know how.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, it's obviously plot, but, it would be more convincing if she was more normal seeming. I mean, she just seems so obviously sinister. She, of course, eats the apple, immediately says, "I feel strange," and then, falls down in her coma, essentially. And this is really why Snow White doesn't speak to me. I mean, she's not very active. Her main thing that she seems to do, her most active thing she seems to do is cleaning. And she also really is, not that bright.
Yeah, she's really, to say she's a two-dimensional character is kind of giving it more credit than it deserves, really. She's a bundle of expectations in a pretty package. Is pretty much what she is. And, the witch is a far more compelling character.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's possible to watch this movie and go, well, I kind of like the witch. I just don't have to be that evil and vain.
Right.
And, then I can roll my castle and talk to my friend in the mirror. Right. So, if you're going to pick a female role model out of this movie, I suggest that you pick the queen.
I would agree with that, yes. The best role model is, of course, still the assorted woodland creatures.
Absolutely. They
go and fetch the dwarves. The dwarves at first are like, why are these creatures all attacking us? But figure out at some point that it's because they're trying to get them to go back and rescue Snow White. They are brought back, and so they all come back. They kind of see the witch escaping and all pursue her. We've got our kind of classic Disney, we've got to kill off the villain, but we don't want any of the heroes to actually actively kill the villain.
This scene is so gorgeous.
It is, yeah.
I feel like from an artistic point of view, just everything about it, the animation, the painting, the special effects they used for the lightning, the water. Oh my gosh, the water. How did they animate water this way? All throughout the movie. I don't think water was animated that well again for probably 30 or 40 years. It's just glorious. And then, the music and the sound effects, just incredible. And that beautiful, long, slow, lazy glide of the vultures.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. She is killed in the process of she's kind of trying to knock over a boulder to kill the dwarves, and instead, lightning hits and she's already sort of off balance because she's trying to push this boulder, and she is knocked off the cliff and kills. And the vultures are thrilled, of course.
Now that same thing with the boulder happens in the movie She. It's not she who deals with the boulder, but that whole kind of boulder idea is all part of that. Just, shameless.
Yeah, I'm going to have to watch this.
Shameless stealing from a movie. Yeah, it's a fun movie.
Yeah.
It's a fun movie.
The dwarfs return, find that Snow White is dead, and they hold a vigil at her bed. Even Grumpy is crying. The animals are also mourning, but they're not letting the animals inside to do so, which I don't think is very nice.
No.
But they do fashion a glass and gold coffin, which is now outside, and so they can all hold their vigil there. And meanwhile, the prince, it just says he, looked for Snow White, and then he hears that there's this lady in a coffin, and is like, maybe I'll check her out. So the prince arrives singing while the animals and dwarves are bringing their offerings of flowers. The coffin, which does not have a lid.
I think it does.
I guess, it looks at some point like it does, but we skip the bit where they took off the lid.
Yeah, that's what happened. Yeah. They don't show you.
Yeah, they don't show you the lid being removed.
Yeah.
He kisses her. It, takes a minute, and at first they're very disappointed, but she does indeed wake up, since these two people who have met exactly one time for 3 minutes are apparently deeply in love with one another. And everybody's very happy, including all the animals and the dwarves. The dwarves all get a last kiss on the head from her as she is taken away toward this distant castle, which is set up so that it kind of looks like it's sort of in heaven.
It's a little strange.
Yeah, it's sort of on top of clouds. It's kind of bizarre.
And it's not clear to me whose castle it is either.
I assume the prince's, but that's only because she keeps singing that the prince is going to take her away to his castle.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like hers is closer is all I'm getting at.
Right. Yes. But again, I'm very unclear about what the geopolitics are, right? Of who exactly rules what.
Is she, she should be now queen, right?
Right. By virtue of inheritance. I mean, you would think, yes.
You would think, yeah. Her and the birds.
Right. It's like, actually, let's go to my castle, and I am in charge now, and you are my consort. But that doesn't seem entirely like how it's working.
We'll bring the dwarves and all their jewels, and we'll have a nice time.
Very wealthy kingdom. We are informed, however, though, that they do live happily ever after, in whichever kingdom that may be.
Yes.
So let's kind of delve in now to some of the historical elements of the film in the Vera et Falso section. Given that this is, of course, not a film that is presuming to be a representation of a particular place and time, I would not say exactly necessarily that this film is, quote, getting things wrong in the same way as I might for other works of historical fiction. But I think it'll be interesting to talk through some of the ways in which this does and doesn't resonate with historical realities. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the aesthetics of this film. We've talked a little bit about the costumes. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that as well?
Oh, my goodness, yes. Okay. So we've talked a lot about the queen's outfit. Then when she turns into the kind of crone witch hag, then she just gets a very simple black cloak. Mm-hmm. Snow White, her dress, and there's a few people who critique her dress historically, and in fact there's one woman who did a video where she tried to make a historically accurate representation of what Snow White would have worn, assuming that she's a noblewoman or a princess of like 14th or 15th century Germany. I think is what they finally decided on. Obviously her shoes are 1930s shoes, and, the little bow in her hair and her hairstyle. The collar that she and the queen use are, both much closer to Elizabethan period. Mm-hmm. So they do a lot of mix and match with the dresses styles. But what really interests me about the costuming is the dwarves, because they are wearing a Phrygian cap. And the Phrygian cap, also called the Liberty cap, it goes back to like ancient Greece and possibly before, and was known as the kind of cap that freed slaves would wear. And then during the French Revolution, the revolutionaries adopted the Phrygian cap as a sign that they were revolutionaries, and then it got called the Liberty cap. So that cap has represented kind of workers and workers' rights for millennia. And, the fact that the dwarves are wearing them, it has a lot to do with the fact that dwarves and gnomes are kind of mixed up. They're kind of the same thing. And what we think of as mythical dwarves, we should probably be calling gnomes. It's a little less, I feel like, ableist. There's a lot of tropes in terms of dwarfism that are inaccurate. But one of the things that the gnomes are always wearing these Phrygian caps because they are always part of the working class. They are never part of the ruling class. And in Hollywood at the time, and again, let me be clear, I don't think there was some sort of conspiracy. I don't think anybody was sitting there going, oh, we're going to make the dwarves look like socialists. I don't think that was it at all. But nonetheless, in Los Angeles and Hollywood, like what we think of now as democratic socialism was having a huge moment.
Yeah.
And in 1934, a democratic socialist ran for governor and was beaten due to, shenanigans by the powers that be, as always seems to happen. And for me, the fact that the dwarves, they work so hard, and they're clearly independent.
Yeah.
And they're willing to buck authority.
I like that. I like in some ways their adherence to this is when we clock out. We have our good union jobs, and if you expect us to work any longer, we get overtime pay.
That's right. And you know what, though? The animators were not unionized.
Right.
And it wasn't after this movie came out, the first cartoonists and animators union was formed in 1938.
Oh, wow. So very soon after this.
Right at the same time, they're like, oh, hey, there's a feature-length film here. It just made Disney millions of dollars. He was able to build his whole studio on the profits. We should unionize. And so Fleischer Studios unionized first. Disney held out until 1941.
Wow.
And lost a lot of animators. Right. He responded very badly in true capitalist fashion, to workers who just, like you said, they want to clock out.
Yeah.
They want to go, okay, I'm done. I go home. And, wanted a fair pay structure.
Yeah. There's a lot of very good reasons to want unions and a lot of reasons why capitalists
basic things.
Don't want to give them their unions.
But so here are these artists, many of them female, desperately wanting a union. They were paid $5 a gag.
Wow.
For every joke that they thought of. And back then that would have been $50 for every joke that they thought of to add to the movie. So they are coming up with all these, these jokes.
Yeah.
About that really kind of support workers' rights and everything else. And, those poor dwarves are working so hard, they clearly don't have time to clean their house.
Right.
So they needed that time off. So I love the dwarves' outfits. The shoes are very medieval, but they do have belts and buckles.
Yeah.
Which, you don't get those kinds of metal buckles by being poor. So I guess they traded in some of those gems for buckles.
Right. You got to trade some of them. Right.
That's right. But I love that Phrygian cap and everything that it represents.
Yeah, and that's really fascinating. So I wanted to say a little bit about architecture as well. The castle very much makes me think of something like the city walls of Carcassonne, where we have in the 19th century this major restoration, which was subsequently criticized as making them look like what they thought something medieval should look like. And this is Viollet-le-Duc. That's his thing, sort of. And so it's what he thinks it should look like, as opposed to necessarily what it actually does look like, right? I mean, obviously the loss of the spire of Notre Dame was a tragedy, but I always kind of mark, it's a spire that was kind of added by this guy because he thought in the 19th century, because he thought a medieval cathedral should have a spire like this. And so the castle very much has that sort of vibe to me architecturally, that it's a kind of imaginary of the medieval that's very much in kind of 19th century medievalism, as opposed to precisely what real medieval castles necessarily look like.
I kind of saw them as really being more like 17th or 16th century castles, but you are absolutely right. There is nothing definitively medieval about that castle. It did, however, I feel like this movie really informed the aesthetics of Disneyland as a whole. Yeah.
And the Disney logo as well. It's very much this sort of castle.
Absolutely. And it is certainly what I grew up thinking of as a real castle.
Yeah.
For sure.
The cottage, I think, is fascinating because the cottage, first of all, it is gorgeous. It is very nice for a cottage in the woods that is inhabited by a group of working class manual laborers.
In the middle of the woods like that, I mean, you would expect it to be a little more cleared out. Mm-hmm. I think they'd been living there for a while. I don't know if there'd be quite so many trees quite so close to the house. But that's, an issue for the planning commission, not for them. Really cool thing about the cottages is that it prompted a whole new style of architecture in Los Angeles called storybook style. And Disney built 7 cottages, 7 Dwarfs cottages in Los Angeles. They still stand today. Oh, wow. And if you're lucky, you can rent one and live in one.
Oh, wow. That would be, I'm sure, out of my budget to actually probably rent one, but I'd love to go visit.
I don't think we can do that. I think you can only see them if you live inside them, but they are still there, which is pretty darned amazing. Yeah. But some of the animators lived in those cottages.
Wow. Like, it is and the aesthetic of the cottage is really interesting. It does have a sort of kind of vaguely 15th century vibe. It actually reminds me a lot of some 15th century urban merchants' homes. But there's actually some in France that are still standing, and it has a lot of similarities to that. And the cottage is very nice. I like the cottage.
There's some fun little kind of, I guess we'd call them, I don't know if Easter eggs is the right word, details. Mm-hmm. But, the theme of the cottage is owls. You see owls everywhere. And, that implies a certain amount of wisdom. Yeah. And then the scene where Dopey is looking, he's heard the scary noise. He's gone up the stairs to see what kind of monster is up there. And he pokes his head through the door. But the carving just to his right on the floor is of a bunny rabbit, like a scared rabbit. And so everywhere in the cottage are owls except that one little spot where he looks scared. And then the organ...
Right.
There's nothing authentic about the musical instruments. We'll just
not at all.
Just say that right there. But, as an architecture historian, I really can't find much fault with that little cottage, even though they're working class.
Yeah. No, I think the cottage is really fantastic. The Queen's potions setup, I will note, is somewhat it's fantastic, but that very much looks like I could see actually that working as a kind of 17th century alchemical setup. Mm-hmm. It doesn't quite look medieval, but it is. So that looks a little bit later. But
I don't know. I'm not so good about when glass blowing got to that level of skill where you can have lambics and things like that. But it's also just kind of your generic dungeon.
Right. Yeah.
In that sense. But she does have books on the shelves, which I loved. One book for alchemy, one for witchcraft, one for... It's like, wow, if only my library was quite that succinct.
Right.
But I certainly wanted that when I was a little girl. Yeah. And I went home and would play alchemy because of that.
Yeah. The one other thing that I will note as a kind of slightly discordant note, you mentioned the animals in the cottage. There are, of course, our assorted woodland creatures, and I will note that a couple of them would not be are not native to Europe, that they are New World animals. So raccoons and chipmunks
good point.
Are the two that jumped out to me that we definitely saw at some point that you would not have found in 15th century Europe.
Good catch.
Yeah. So if we kind of take the overall vibe as maybe suggesting in 15th-ish century setting, I find it really interesting that we have among the dwarves really just one, Grumpy, who is deeply concerned about witchcraft. Since the 15th century is this moment where we're really first seeing anxiety about witchcraft beginning to arise, right? That it's often incorrectly displaced onto the earlier Middle Ages, but really it's not a major concern at that point. It's something that we really start seeing in the 15th century. This is, of course, when the Malleus Maleficarum is published in 1486. And we do, I will note, in that work have a little bit of this concern about the wiles of women as being linked to witchcraft. But that in the Malleus Maleficarum, it actually does pretty overtly state that it's specifically magical. It's not just that you can, by being very beautiful, tempt men to do various things, right? Like, that's not witchcraft. That is a different problem. And in fact, it explicitly says basically that beauty is irrelevant, that through witchcraft and through things like, oh, well, this woman is actually secretly forcing men to, eat her dung or something like, or, eat her poop or something along those lines, that she is managing to bewitch them in various ways. And so even if she is unappealing or less appealing than his other romantic partner, that she is able to bewitch him in this particular way. And also, of course, the Malleus Maleficarum is also one of my favorites, and that is a text that goes into great detail about how witches can create illusions that convince men that their penises have disappeared. And that they have to, get the witch to, forgive them for whatever they've done, right, essentially, to bring it back, right? That they take pains to note they can't make your penis actually go away, but they can cast such a convincing illusion that both in terms of your physical experience of it and visually, it seems to not be there.
You have to assume that by that they mean, they couldn't get it up.
But it is this interesting, metaphorical representation of that because, you do sometimes see that in the literal sense, right? You see literal claims that, that witches cause impotence. But there are also these claims that, physically, it looks like I do not have a penis.
As in the shrinkage problem, as documented by Seinfeld. So she gave him a cold bath and it disappeared and he couldn't see it over his belly. Oh my God, it's gone. Is that what we're talking about?
Maybe, right? But yeah, and then there's also these weird, there are these, images that have cats stealing penises for witches. So there's this great engraving, which is this cat who's kind of running off with a penis in its mouth.
Oh, with it in his mouth, mouth. But yeah.
And there's also this woman who's trying to tempt the cat into trading it for a fish, and the cat's having none of it.
None of it. Nope. I got what I want, lady. You can keep your fish. And isn't that a whole bunch of loaded symbolism there?
Oh, yes.
The anxiety, the anxiousness, the male anxiousness about being unable to perform sexually, obviously is what fuels all of this.
Right.
And, you can just, basically, it doesn't take too much imagination to, picture some erstwhile lover, with his beautiful wife or mistress or whatever in bed, and maybe he's getting a little older and he can't quite perform the way he used to. And so it's so much less embarrassing to say, oh, a witch took my penis.
Right.
Than to admit that,
that you can't get
not
enough.
As virile.
Right.
Just not as virile as he used to be.
There's also, I think, some really interesting things happening with religion. So actually, do you want to go ahead and talk about some of the kind of Freya kind of goddess element?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for reminding me. So, fans of Nordic mythology are going to know all about Freya, and Freya is amazing. One of my favorite goddesses in, a whole worldwide pantheon of goddesses that I adore. She was in a chariot that was driven by gray cats. She was the goddess of love, sex, warfare, and intelligence. Kind of unlike Aphrodite, who makes questionable choices of lovers, as we all do sometimes. Freya had boundaries, Freya had standards. At one point, she wanted a magical necklace, and the dwarves of Brisingamen, who were originally elves, and were not considered to be short in stature at all or live in the ground or anything like that. These were just magical beings that worked with metals. And she went to the dwarves and she said, look, I really, really want this magical necklace. And they said, well, what's it worth it to you? Are you willing to have sex with each of us for one night? And she said, sure.
Gotta get the necklace.
Sure.
It's magic.
She wanted the necklace. And, I think that this, when you look at this from an allegorical point of view, and that it's the four dwarves, and that they represented each of the elements, fire, air, earth, water. And so she had to complete what was essentially a magic rite.
Right.
With each one in order for this magical work to be created. So, to our ears, it sounds very questionable, but it actually kind of has a lot of beautiful symbolism to it. It has to do with love magic and sex magic and everything else. She was the goddess of sex.
Yeah.
And so if she's going to co-create with these allegories of the elements, it makes sense that there would be some sex magic involved. And so that got brought forward over time. And, you know, the idea of this woman having to leave her home and go to some place where there's these magical beings that protect her and help her grow up in some fashion. It comes right down to us through, you know, this Disney movie. That's part of what I find so beautiful about it, is that if you dig enough layers underneath, then you find Freya. And, you know, she didn't take any shit from anybody. She certainly was not cleaning their house, I can promise you that.
Right. And I feel like she would have been smart enough to not eat the poisoned apple.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And not only would she not have eaten the poison apple, but she would have been the one to make it.
Yeah.
Because she was the goddess of magic as well.
Right.
And, you know, when you look at Snow White and the Queen and the Crone, it's all the same character. It's maiden, mother, and crone, white, red, and black, all of those tropes. And, you know, the sort of splitting of that archetype happens way before Disney, you know, happens by ancient Greece, if not sooner, when they get split into Persephone and Hecate and Demeter. And we don't even have to go into the apple because we know what that's all about.
Yes.
So, but I think, you know, seeing these threads come through is really beautiful. And then kind of on that note, there is a town called Lohr in Germany where there was according to legend, a young woman who tried to get away from her stepmother and ended up hiding by going into a local mine, which was supposed to have such low ceilings that only people of small stature could go in there. And so, according to the history, it was people with dwarfism or children who worked that mine. Is that real? We don't know. There's so many towns that claim they're Snow White's, you know, hometown. But I thought that was pretty cool, and listeners might want to look that up.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's really interesting because, of course, there's, you know, these various resonances from local folklore and from Norse mythology, but it also has some really interesting connections with Christian, actually really very much medieval Catholic ideas about sanctity. So first I wanted to remark on the heart box that her stepmother...
that's cool.
Yeah, that she has like a special box that she designates that, you know, she wants Snow White's heart and she's going to put it in the box, and the box even has a picture of a heart on it. And of course, this would have been something that, you know, if you still go to various medieval churches or museums for that matter today, you will find that relics were kept and that the actual physical body parts of saints were considered to have a kind of sacred power. Churches, actually, I believe Catholic churches still are required to have at least a relic in order to be considered a kind of valid church, in order to be consecrated as a church. And that you have them often in these very beautifully designed objects, which not always, but sometimes have on them some kind of mark that highlights what is meant to be inside. So, for example, you know, you have a reliquary that is shaped like an arm that has an arm bone in it. And it's one that, you know, it might not have the arm bone of the apostle it's supposed to have, but, you know, they've x-rayed it and it certainly has somebody's arm. And, you know, you can go various places and see that reliquaries often are kind of set up either so that there is a kind of glass that's making visible even the body part that is inside, or that if not, there is perhaps something kind of on the reliquary to represent either the particular saint it's associated with or the particular body part that it contains.
That's a really cool observation, and really, you know, brings in the whole Gothic Catholicism idea that this is kind of old and vaguely evil, and kind of adds a whole thing like, what was she going to do with that heart?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Was it part of further wicked magics that she was planning? You know, we don't know. Yeah.
Which is a spell that requires the human heart, and If so, good thing she noticed, he found out first that it was a pay cart before going forward with it.
Well, maybe that's how she figured it out. I don't know.
I also found the birds and wildlife really interesting, and this is something that definitely does have other mythological connections, but one of the things that really jumped out at me is its similarity to some of the narratives about St. Francis. And so in the Vita by Thomas of Celano, it talks about the fact that Francis is kind of has this special relationship with birds in particular, so that it emphasizes that animals kind of stop and they don't fly away when he's there. They, in fact, seem to be listening to him preaching, and that he then responds by speaking to them directly. And so that there is this kind of connection of certain kinds of sanctity that also involve this kind of particular special relationship with animals. He's also described as, having this kind of particular sensitivity that if you catch fish, he'll throw them back in the water and, say, like, be careful, don't get caught again. So it's really very charming. And it is interesting because St. Francis is very much one of these saints who, I actually don't know exactly when this happens, but who kind of gets adopted in the United States, in particular for this kind of friendly association with animals, right? That you can go to churches and have all of your pets blessed in honor of St. Francis. And he seems to be one of these saints who kind of gets, even in moments where there are potentially some kind of negative attitudes toward Catholicism, St. Francis kind of gets tamed in some ways and is considered to be compelling.
Yeah, he gets a pass.
Right. I also will note the kind of implicit virginity discourse, often linked with sanctity, of the fact that very specifically, it actually says it is the first kiss of true love. If this is your spouse or longtime lover and you have true love, but you've already kissed, it's too late, I guess, and there's no cure.
You're a goner.
Right.
You're a goner. And thank goodness he didn't try to steal a kiss at the well, because otherwise, game over.
Right. Well, because she kind of ran off, right? And so she has this kind of virginal modesty that she doesn't even get a kiss. And so that's, the only thing that saves her life. So I found that fascinating. And then finally, the sleeping death has some interesting connection with the ideas of incorruptible holy corpses. This is something that's very common in medieval discourses about sanctity, that you dig up a corpse and it's miraculously preserved. It sometimes is noticeably sweet smelling and does not smell of decay. And you can even go and see some of these incorruptible corpses in various places. So there are saints that, and obviously in practice there's some kind of embalming done, but saints whose, entire bodies are on view behind glass. And so there is this kind of interesting connection here of these, with these kind of saintly bodies, which of course are not going to be woken by a kiss, but which are seen to have in some ways some kind of life after death, and that the reason these bodies are preserved and visible is because they are seen to have a kind of power.
That's really interesting. It's kind of like, this myth just sort of caught everything.
Yeah.
And it caught little parts of every culture it went through, which, of course, is what you would expect.
Yeah.
But, then to see it all kind of brought forward into the 20th century, these things just last forever, as long as an incorruptible corpse.
Yes. Yeah, I remember actually being very sad on my last European trip pre-COVID. I was in Italy, and 13th century Saint Angela of Foligno, who I'm very fond of. I just find her and her visions very entertaining. And she is one of the ones who you can go and see her incorruptible corpse, but unfortunately on the day that we were in Foligno, the kind of church shrine was closed, sadly. So no corpse for me. I'll have to hopefully go back one of these days to see the corpse properly.
It's just a reason to go back.
Yes. Yeah. So at this point, we can move into the Historia et Veritas, where we talk about a real historical event, person, or phenomenon. And I thought it would be interesting to talk about stepmothers, since, of course, we have the choice that, interestingly, her real, presumably dead mother, who does show up in some of the Snow White written versions of the fairy tales in various ways, is completely invisible here. Her father is also completely irrelevant. I mean, dead, presumably, but, also not not even talked about.
Not important to the plot.
Right, and the focus is really exclusively on this wicked stepmother figure. Mm-hmm. And I think the history of why it is that stepmothers are so common in fairy tales, because this is obviously far from the only example of that trope, is really interesting given the fact that step-parentage is an extremely common part of life in medieval and early modern Europe. For Christians, divorce would at the time, if we're talking about in a medieval context or an early modern Catholic context, you're not getting divorced, but of course people are getting widowed. Obviously illness happens, women die in childbirth, women also are often, say, marrying men who are perhaps significantly older than them, so if they don't die in childbirth, they have a pretty good chance to outlive them. And there really isn't a lot of stigma in practice against remarriage. That it's quite common, and it would be often very much expected that you would get married again after your spouse has died. For men, this is often because, well, in some cases it's because you might want an heir or an extra heir, but it's also because there would be an expectation that, well, I need somebody to keep track of the house. And which, happens on all sorts of levels, right? It's, literally the kind of cleaning and cooking in lower strata of society. But even in very wealthy households, the expectation is that it is the woman who manages that, right? The man is not the one overseeing your servants and the cooks. That's something that the woman of the house would be expected to do. And so you want a wife to take care of your house and to take care of your children if you have them already.
Somebody's got to make that pie.
Somebody's got to make that pie, or make sure that you've got the cooks in there in the kitchen and they know that
somebody
you want
else
pie
makes
night.
The pie.
Right.
Yeah, if it's the birds, it's fine, but somebody's got to tell the birds to make the pie.
Right. And somebody's got to hire the birds, and
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And then women also, of course, are remarrying, and often this is because they are seeking financial support that unless you are very, very lucky and have a very, very large dowry, and also are sort of up for doing a lot of kind of money management or other work that you haven't necessarily done before to fully support yourself, especially given that if we're talking about, again, the lower strata of society, women's work is often low paid and low status. There are very good reasons financially that women would want to remarry. And of course that, you're in a context where there certainly are people, not everybody, but some people, who would be genuinely concerned about the state of their souls if they engaged in extramarital sex. So lots of people are getting remarried, and that means that there are lots and lots of step-parents. And of course, it's not entirely surprising that regardless of who's either the biological parent or the step-parent, it's pretty much always the woman who gets villainized.
Yep.
Women who remarried are inspiring this anxiety about the fate of their children in a way that men that remarry don't, or that at least if they do, they don't get blamed for it. So if a woman remarries, that then it's like, oh, what are you doing? You're, say, taking your dowry from the household, and so there's kind of overall less wealth based in the household to support the children. It's also quite common that widowed mothers would get named as the legal guardians for their minor children. But legally, they are supposed to be stripped of that guardianship in the event that they remarry. So this doesn't necessarily mean that they're losing custody, because the two things aren't equivalent. Guardianship is really financial. It's about managing your children's wealth. But still, interestingly, there are a lot of contexts in which widowed mothers are seen as the ones who are going to do the best job of that, because they are the ones who care most about their children and their children's futures. And that then if they abandon their children and leave them to some other relative because they're going off and getting remarried, and of course the presumption is also like, well, your husband is going to be managing your stuff now and he's not going to care about your children. Mm-hmm. So that this is looked on negatively in some contexts. But of course it's always the widowed remarrying mother, not the stepfather, who's getting blamed for what's happening here. And similarly, though, when fathers get remarried, they don't get blamed in the same way for the ways in which this might affect their children. The guardianship issue is obviously not one that would matter, because fathers are always presumed to be the legal guardians of their children and don't need documentation for it the way mothers do. But that there is this concern that, you are kind of bringing in this stepmother, and that there are potentially real financial, in particular, consequences to this. So that even if you don't necessarily have a stepmother who is, very obviously abusive and cruel in the way that we see in fairy tales, there is certainly an assumption that she's not going to prioritize her stepchildren in the way that she would prioritize her own children. So that the stepmother would potentially come in, she would be kind of dividing up the estate, especially if she has children of her own. There are cases in which actually women are kind of named, women are actually named the guardians of minor children, which include both biological children and stepchildren. And there is anxiety expressed about whether she's actually going to treat the stepchildren fairly. So as I said there, that, even when we're not necessarily talking about these extreme cases, there is this concern that, and kind of villainization in some ways, of stepmothers as not being kind of there in the best, to look out for the best interests of their stepchildren. That the assumption is, not that you would love and care for them like a parent.
Yeah, and, this whole idea that you live through your children. Mm-hmm. That you live through your biological children, and that your biological children are going to be the one to make sure that prayers are said for you, that hymns are sung for you. And, you're going to invest all your energy and time into the people you think most likely to do that. Mm-hmm. If you already have stepchildren and they're already obligated to pay for their own mother's hymns and prayers.
Right.
Why would you put everything into them? They've, in a sense, their mother is never really gone. Mm-hmm. And their obligations to that parent are never really gone. I think it's also true that a lot of the time, especially when a man took another wife, she was often younger. Mm-hmm. Than the previous wife, and may even have been much closer in age to his children.
Yeah, that certainly wouldn't have been uncommon.
Than to him. So that definitely complicates things. And we know that step-parenting is difficult in the best of circumstances. Mm-hmm. Like, just to look at, and this, moves forward in time a little bit, but with King Henry VIII, all of a sudden Mary got pushed aside. Mm-hmm. Then Elizabeth was made the heir, and then Elizabeth got pushed aside, and then Edward was made the heir. So with each new stepmother, there was a new heir to the throne. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to see how, even though like 99.999% of the people had no kingdom
right.
to worry about, we're still kind of trying to emulate that kind of behavior.
Right. And you're certainly seeing it, because obviously inheritance matters in, non-kingdom mm-hmm. contexts too. And that is something that you see, in terms of, say, like the kind of mercantile classes that mm-hmm. you think you've kind of got things settled. You have a sense of approximately what kind of inheritance you might be expecting. And then that gets upended by the changing family dynamics, that there's a new wife, yes. there might be minor stepchildren. It might actually be in a position where then the late wife is the one who's going to be managing the estate on behalf of the minor step-siblings. So it does very much kind of create this, kind of shakes up family dynamics in these kind of very particular, often financial ways. And that does very much kind of lead to anxieties, which do make sense. But it is, I think, fascinating and important to keep in mind that they tend to disproportionately lay the blame on women. And just as a kind of quick book recommendation,
yes.
I will note, this is something that Christiane Klapisch-Zuber in her Women, Family, and Ritual in Renaissance Italy talks a little bit about these dynamics and links them to the fact that women in this 15th, 16th century Italian context are often not seen as being really part of the family and part of the lineage and part of the household in the same way as men. And so, of course, it makes sense that if you have to lay blame somewhere, that's where it gets laid.
As usual.
Yeah.
Still true.
Right. Right. Yes. Well, so for the next segment, the Fabula Nostra, is where we talk about a film or show or other piece of media we might want to create inspired by this one. And I'm actually going to go first, just because it is linked to what we were talking about, that I think it would be really interesting to have a Snow White-inspired story, which attempts to kind of tell both sides and potentially think about this kind of stepchild, step-parent relationship in a way that notes that both parties are looking out for their own interests, but that doesn't actually make either party evil per se, but that there are just these conflicts that happen over inherited wealth that make a lot of sense in some ways. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking about that, and my ideal casting for that is that I was thinking of Alison Brie as our Snow White and Lena Headey as our stepmother. And I am actually deliberately choosing this casting in part because it is a case in which there is not a big age difference, that they are, I believe, 9 years apart. So I think then this will also, highlight, as we were talking about before, the fact that there is this kind of additional, particularly awkward dynamic created by the fact that it's this woman being brought into the household who is probably closer to your age than she is to your father's. And I think it would be interesting also potentially to do something with the fact that in terms of actually what we know about some people with dwarfism in the late medieval, early modern world, mm-hmm. a lot of what we know is this kind of really messed up dynamic that these are people who are mm-hmm. basically kind of pressed into basically being like professional entertainers at court in ways that are obviously ableist and disturbing. And so I think it would be interesting to kind of think about that history and to kind of maybe kind of include that in terms of thinking at the character. If we wanted to say make this like a historical story that didn't have as many fantastical elements, that kind of thinking about the Seven Dwarfs in that way.
I would watch the heck out of that movie. That sounds fantastic.
Thank you. Do you have an idea as well?
I do. I wrote a story some years ago where, you know how in a lot of the old myths, like the women are interpreted as evil now that mm-hmm. wouldn't have been evil at the time. And so I wanted to see a story where the Queen and Snow White are part of a castle of a town, mm-hmm. and it's invaded. And they kill all the men in the castle. And so all that's left of the original royal family are the queen, who is Snow White's aunt, mm-hmm. and Snow White. And so the queen, the usurper king, has designs on Snow White. And so the queen becomes the queen, mm-hmm. decides to marry him. She has magical powers, and so, makes him fall in love with her mm-hmm. as a way to protect Snow White. And her true lover, the huntsman, takes Snow White out into the woods where, she hangs out with the elves and the magical creatures, and then comes back and avenges her family.
Yeah, I would love to watch that. Of course, Snow White is obviously one of these areas where there's a million adaptations.
So many. And, you can see why. It's just so rich.
Yeah.
It's so incredibly rich. I think I do want to just kind of mention that there are so many terrible racial and ableist stereotypes in the dwarves that I hope would not be repeated today.
Right.
And I think that your comment about them being forced to be entertainers is really spot on. Like, there's sort of 7 different kinds of fools
mm-hmm.
in this movie and take that role very heavily. And they're also truth tellers.
Yeah.
And they take that part of it as well.
And it's interesting because while I think they do ultimately end up in some ways being kind of more well-rounded and interesting characters than, mm-hmm. say, Snow White, certainly than the prince, who's really a kind of non-entity.
He's a cipher.
Right.
Yeah.
But that it is this kind of weird setup in that they each have their own quality that they are supposed to embody in a very specific way, and that is seen as kind of defining their personality.
And they had 30 names to start with. And then finally picked those 7. So there's a really wonderful documentary called The Making of Snow White, and you can watch it on YouTube. I think it's just 39 minutes.
Cool.
Really fun to see.
Cool.
So I recommend that, and I recommend the movie She.
Yeah, and I will do one other recommendation, something that could end up being covered at some point on this podcast, but that one Snow White adaptation, which is Gregory Maguire, so he's the author of Wicked, also wrote a novel, Mirror, Mirror, which does not totally challenge the idea of a kind of wicked stepmother, but does make the interesting move of making the wicked stepmother Lucretia Borgia, which is sort of fun. So I don't agree with all of the historical choices made in it, but it's a fun book.
understood. He's a wonderful writer.
Yes, absolutely. So at this point, we can move into our estimatio or rating section, where we rate the film on a scale from 1 to 5 based on whatever fully subjective criteria we want. So Rachel, would you like to go first?
Sure. I mean, this is a solid 5 for me. I just love it visually, and it influenced me so heavily as an artist, just in ways that I'm not even I think fully cognizant of. Yeah. But I do, a lot of set painting and a lot of set design. And when I moved into a house with a basement, I painted it to look like the dwarf's cottage in Snow White. Like I've got, kind of big round sort of Disney stones and the timbers and everything. I didn't get around to painting the carving in the timbers, but, maybe I should put some owls in those now.
Yeah,
but
that sounds lovely.
I just love it. I mean, you obviously have to watch it with your critical thinking lenses on, but goodness knows that's true of every piece of media that we consume. So.
Oh, yes. I'm going to be a bit harsher, I'm afraid, which is largely just because I really struggle with this movie in particular. So we talked certainly in terms of the kind of ableism and racial stereotypes of the dwarves, but also really in terms of the misogyny. It's not like Disney in general has a amazing track record on a lot of that, and there's obviously a lot that many people have said about the Disney princess and about the kind of problematic aspects of how women are portrayed by Disney and the kinds of models that it sets up for what women should be like. But this is an example that I find in some ways kind of one of the almost most egregious in terms of really Snow White. Her main personality trait is that she likes cleaning.
Well, that's not necessarily a terrible thing. But I hear you. I totally hear you.
And she's very passive.
That's a totally fair criticism. I would not want to be Snow White. I would not want my daughter to be Snow White. I wouldn't recommend that anybody be Snow White. And I feel like it is so obviously a fantasy and over the top at this point. As compared to, say, like a live action movie or something, or even something a little hipper where there is sort of a little more kind of gratuitous feminism thrown in, but I totally hear you, and I certainly wouldn't argue with you at all on that point for sure. I think that's totally fair criticism.
Yeah, and I will actually, and this is actually, I'm going to probably up the rating slightly from what I might give it based on my kind of difficulties with Snow White as a heroine, because I do actually think, as we talked about, the kind of medievalism aspects of this film are really interesting, including the visuals, which are so excellent. And I'm often a very harsh critic, so I'm going to be giving it a 2.5.
Wow.
So if it makes me feel better, I don't like anything.
Fair. That's good. No, and I don't feel bad at all, not even remotely. These things are so personal.
Yeah.
And when you see something as a kid and fall in love with it, you're not supposed to be looking at it with a critical eye.
Right.
That's supposed to come later when we're adults. Yeah, don't be like Snow White.
Right. And that's in some ways one of my challenges kind of with this film, right? Is that yes. I am not a parent, but I feel like it would be really challenging for me to think about, whether and what Disney I would encourage my children to watch if I had children, and what I wouldn't.
It's all so bad. It's all so terrible. And I actually, there were a lot of Disney films that I did not show my kids when they were younger. My daughter was addicted to Pocahontas, which is, problematic on a whole other level. But you know what? Like, she grew up and became a passionate defender of Indigenous rights, and I think that we can transcend this programming. Yeah. But you are absolutely right. It just taken on face value as a piece of media and as a looking at it as, are there feminist icons here? only if you're the witch. Really.
Right. Yeah, she's I think, the real role model here.
I think so here. I agree.
Yeah, I wish that she wanted power. I feel like I would be happier with this movie if the villain was actually, at least if she was a woman who was doing this because she wanted Snow White out of the way so she could rule the kingdom. I feel like I would actually like that better than this kind of vanity motive, which is very much like, oh, this is what women care about. Women care about their looks.
And it's nonsensical because she's already
gorgeous,
objectively, by any standards, beautiful and really more beautiful than Snow White. Yeah. You know, Snow White is young. She's got that going for her. She's got those cute little chipmunk cheeks. But we don't know. You know.
Right. It's like, wait 10 years and you'll be back on top.
Yeah, wait 10 years or wait 20 years. You know, the queen is clearly in her late 30s or 40s. You know, stunning. She looks fantastic.
Yeah.
Still stunning. And then, you know, the hag that she turns into, I love her. You know, I love that grandma. Like, that's what I'm turning into.
Good goal as any.
If I bring a magic apple to your house, then it really is going to make your dreams come true. I'm not going to waste my time having you fall on the floor and then have to deal with a body. It just all sounds very poorly planned is what I'm saying.
The old woman with like less sinister chuckling. Yeah, perfectly good role model.
But I would say, you know, as an artist, it gets full marks from me. And my love and respect for the film really has everything to do with my love and respect for those artists.
Yes.
You know, hundreds of them that, you know, worked around the clock, didn't go home, you know, just painting and painting and painting and drawing to make the most beautiful thing that they could possibly make. And oh my gosh, they did an amazing job. So if you don't want to be polluted by, you know, by the story and the messages, you know, turn on Pink Floyd and turn off the sound and watch it that way.
Yeah, and especially also, you know, as adults, we certainly, you know, are all very capable of watching things, you know, with our critical eye. And
exactly.
I often say that there are often things that I'll, you know, give a low rating to, but that doesn't mean that I'm saying don't watch it. This is certainly visually, I think this is a classic that holds up. Plot-wise, I'm not 100% sure it holds up, but aesthetically, absolutely.
Sounds good.
So, are there places where the listeners could find you on the internet?
Well, you know, I tend to be a behind-the-scenes kind of person, but I do have a couple podcasts. One of them is through my Shakespeare company, Rose City Shakespeare Company. I have a 12th Night podcast. I did an audio recording of 12th Night, and it's got sound effects and everything else. I'm currently working on some commentary that I recorded with some other directors, and I'm deep into the sound editing process now, which is probably going to take me a little while.
Yeah.
But we get into every scene and uncover all the dick jokes because there are so many dick jokes. Oh, it's the best. And then there's my first podcast I did, which is currently on hiatus, is called Actually Autistic. And it's something that I started when I discovered at 57, much to my surprise, that I'm autistic, and discovered my community. And I got to interview a whole bunch of really interesting people who are also actually autistic to talk about specifically what happens when you realize as an adult that you're not weird, that you're not broken, that you're just a different neurotype, and there's lots of us out there. So that's Actually Autistic. You can find that anywhere. And Rose City Shakespeare Company 12th Night Podcast. I think if you enter all of those words into your search bar, you will find them. And, I just started one more podcast. I'm on a podcast called Shattered Worlds RPG. I just started a brand new character there, and it's super fun.
All right. Well, thank you so much. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe in your preferred podcatcher app and rate and review us. I'll read new 5-star reviews in future episodes. Please also follow the podcast on Twitter at Media-eval Pod and join our Facebook group. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sarah Ifft Decker. And if you have any questions or suggestions, I'd love to hear from you via email at media.evalpod@gmail.com. So thank you, Rachel, again for joining me. This was a lot of fun talking at this.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I had so much fun. Thank you.
Good. And thank you all for listening to Media-eval. Bye.
Bye.